Well, this fall, I should say, we're telling stories of reconciliation. And so this is the day we get to tell a Bible story of reconciliation, a story about the two brothers, Jacob and Esau, and both their separation and their reconciliation. Before I quite get to that, though, I want to talk a little bit about a man whose name was Norman Maclean. Norman Maclean grew up near Missoula, Montana, just south of here, but he and his brother grew up there. That's why I'm telling you about him. And he went off, left their rural lifestyle and went off to become an English professor at the University of Chicago. One of the things that he wrote was what's called a semi-autobiographical novella called A River Runs Through It. You may recognize that title. It was made into a movie directed and narrated by Robert Redford. A movie that hasn't made a lot of the best movies ever made list, but it certainly makes mine. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie. I cry every time I see it. I cry like a baby every time I see it. Not because it's sad, but because it's so beautiful. I believe this is the most beautiful movie ever filmed. So if we can see, and of course it doesn't hurt, that Brad Pitt plays the younger brother. Can we see the next one? Yeah, so they're the two brothers in Missoula, Montana, and it's a fishing movie. So Brad Pitt plays Paul, and a character actor whose name I can never remember plays Norman Maclean. And the book begins like this. In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. We lived at the junction of great trout rivers in western Montana, and our father was a Presbyterian minister and a fly fisherman who tied his own flies and taught others. He told us about Christ's disciples being fishermen, and we were left to assume, as my brother and I did, that all first-class fishermen on the Sea of Galilee were fly fishermen, and that John, the favorite, was a dry fly fisherman. I don't know if you know about fly fishing, but... So, this is a story about brothers who really don't understand each other that well, but who still care for each other. And our Bible story this morning is also about a story about brothers who don't understand each other. What Norman Maclean says about brothers is this. Yet even in the loneliness of the canyon, he means the canyon of the river where they fished, and we're going to hear about another river canyon later on. Even there I knew that there were others like me who had brothers they did not understand, but wanted to help. We are probably those referred to as our brother's keepers, possessed of one of the oldest and possibly one of the most futile and certainly one of the most haunting instincts. It will not let us go. Our story of Jacob and Esau begins at the beginning during their mother Rebekah's pregnancy, which was a difficult pregnancy for her. We say that the children struggled together within her. And when the time for her to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out all red, his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. One of the things you have to remember about this culture and this time is that names really mattered in those days. It wasn't just something that sounded nice, it had a meaning. And that meaning was meant to say who you were as a person, and children then grew up and were expected to grow into their names. Names just not who they were, but who they are as a person. And so Esau is a word that means hairy or rough. And Esau did in fact grow up to be a hairy, rough, outdoors kind of a guy. He was a guy who liked to go hunting and fishing, and he had chest hair sprouting out of his collar, and he was just one of those big manly kind of guys. Not a thinker really, but a manly kind of a guy. Well, you're going to say about? Yeah, never mind. Men can too think when we want to. So they named him Esau, and afterward his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel. And we're meant to understand by that even in the womb, Jacob wanted to pull his brother back so that he could go first, so that he could be the eldest, the firstborn, so that he could get his father's birthright and his father's blessing. But he was the second. And so he was named Jacob. Jacob means heel grabber, or usurper, or supplanter, or we would say maybe in just ordinary, everyday 21st century English, cheater. Jacob was a cheater. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. We're also told that Esau was a hairy man, and Jacob was a smooth man. A lot of the art of Jacob shows him as a bald person. But he was smooth also in that other way. He was a smooth operator. He was a person who was not afraid to use deceit and trickery and cleverness to get what he wanted, and he wanted a lot. So the boys grew up. There's adventures that they had. I haven't got time to talk about that. The story you probably know about Jacob and Esau is that Esau sold his birthright. He was the firstborn. He had the birthright. He sold his birthright to his brother, kind of tricked into it, sold it for a bowl of stew. And then later on, Jacob stole his father's blessing, the father's blessing that should rightfully have gone to Esau. Jacob stole that. So a broken relationship right there. We're told that Esau hated Jacob because of the things he had stolen from him and said, after my father dies, I will kill my brother Jacob. And because Isaac was, their father was sick, that was expected to happen. He actually did live for quite a long time, but Jacob thought the best thing to do was to run. So his mother said, go to my brother Laban, who lives way up north. Go and stay with him. Go and hide with him. And so this pattern of Jacob's life began where he would get himself in trouble and then run away from the consequences. More adventures up with Laban. Laban was almost a match for Jacob in trickery. And so there's stories about how the two of them struggle with each other to try and outdo and out-trick and out-deceive the other and get an advantage so that they can get even more wealthy than they already are. Some fun stories. Jacob ends up marrying both of Laban's daughters. He loves one. Rachel he loves. But before he can marry Rachel, he has to marry her older sister, Leah. And there's a great story about that in Genesis 29 or 30, if you want to go home and read it. Not only that, but each of these two daughters is now his two wives. Each of them has a handmaid, and he becomes involved with each of them. And so with these 4 women, he has children with them all, a total of 11 boys. And later in the story, he's going to have a 12th boy and also a daughter named Dinah. But the part of the story we want to get to is the 2 brothers. So, the time comes when his relationship with Laban is really tense, and Laban's sons, his brothers-in-law, are tired of Jacob's shenanigans. It's getting uncomfortable there, and so Jacob does what Jacob does. He runs. He flees. When Laban and the boys are away on business, Jacob takes his wives and his handmaids and his children and all the livestock that rightfully belongs to him. He doesn't steal anything. It takes all its and just goes in the middle of the night. And he decides that he's going to go back to his father. But of course that means going back to his brother as well. And he's very uncertain how that is going to go. The last he knew, his brother was going to kill him. And so as he starts to go, he sends messengers forward. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Edom becomes another name for Esau, and it means red. He's a red, hairy guy. And he tells these messengers, thus so you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now. It's been about 20 years. And I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and slaves, and I just want you to know that I'm coming in order that I may find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Those would be 400 armed men. Well, you can imagine Jacob's, or maybe you can't imagine Jacob's reaction to that, how big his eyes would have gotten. We're told that he was greatly afraid and distressed. I think he was absolutely panicked about this situation. And we're told his reaction was to divide his wives and the handmaids and his children and his livestock and all of his possessions, divide them into two camps. Because he says, if Esau falls on one and destroys it, then perhaps the other one can escape. I've known families that would not all fly together. You know, if they all had to go someplace, that they would divide the family and take two separate airplanes in case one of them crashed. There'd still be somebody left. I never understood that because I would never want to be one of the ones left, you know. But anyway, I wouldn't want to be the one of the ones crashed either. But I'd rather we all crash together than, anyway. Never mind. So that's one of his responses. His other response is to try and buy Esau off, because that's how his mind works. He thinks to himself, well, I could be bought off. Maybe my brother could be too. So he sends gifts to his brother. First he sends somebody with some goats, and then he sends somebody with some sheep, and then he sends somebody with some camels, and then somebody with some cattle, and then somebody with some donkeys. And all of them he instructs the person who drives these livestock to say that these are a present sent to my lord Esau, because Jacob says to himself, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. Maybe or maybe not. Well, on the final night when these two approaching brothers are about to meet, his last chance to flee, Jacob decides he's not going to. For once in his life, he's going to stand and meet his brother. But he's at and we can see the next slide, he's at the ford of the river Jabbok. This doesn't look like much of a river. It doesn't look like it needs a ford, does it? But in fact, sometimes a year it has a pretty good current. He's there at the ford of the river Jabbok, and he sends everybody else across the river where Esau will come. He sends his wives and his children and all the livestock, sends them all, and he stays on this side of the river. Because Jacob is on the edge. He's on the edge of this meeting, whatever that will mean, perhaps the edge of his life. This meeting with his brother. He's on the edge of night, soon to be the edge of dawn, as we'll see. And he's on the edge of the river. Let me tell you what Norman MacLean says about rivers. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. Well, Jacob is haunted by waters as well. As he lays himself down to sleep that night, we are told, a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Perhaps one of the most singularly unhelpful sentences in all of the Bible. Doesn't tell us anything. A man wrestled with him. Who is this man? We don't know. We know that the man seems to be stronger than Jacob, but he's not able to prevail over Jacob. And we know that Jacob certainly doesn't prevail over him, but Jacob hangs on anyway. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." Who is this man who can't be seen in the daylight? Is he a spirit from the river? Is he an assassin sent from his brother? Let me go, for it is almost daylight. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So the man said to him, what is your name? And Jacob said, my name is heel grabber. My name is usurper. My name is supplanter. My name is cheater. Then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Israel means one who strives with God. Our first clue about who this man might be, one who strives with God. For you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, what is your name? Because to have knowledge of a person's name is to have knowledge of that person. Maybe even some kind of a hold over them. And the man said, why is it that you ask my name? And then he blessed him. We don't know what the blessing was, but he blessed him. And Jacob called the place Peniel, which means the face of God. For he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. And the sun rose upon him as he crossed over the ford of the river Jabbok, limping because of the injury to his hip. And so we come to the meeting. And to his credit, Jacob goes to the front of all his family and all the belongings. And he walks out to meet Esau, and he bows down 7 times before him, still hoping to get a break. And this is what happens. Esau ran to meet him, and he embraced him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. Remember that sentence, because we're going to hear it again later on. Kissed him, and they wept. And then Esau says, who are all these women and children? And Jacob says, they're mine. These are my wives, and these are my kids, and all this stuff, all these livestock, it's all mine. And Esau says, well, then why did you send me all those sheep and those goats and those, He says, I don't need any of that stuff. And Jacob says, well, I just wanted you to have it. No, he says, I got plenty of stuff. I don't need that. Jacob says, take it anyway, please, for my sake. So he agrees to take these gifts. And then Esau says, well, let's go home. Come with me and we'll journey together and we'll go back to Seir, to our home. And Jacob says, well, I got all these sheep and they just lambed and we'd have to go really, really slow. And I got all these kids and they'd have to go slow and you'd travel much faster than I would. Why don't you go on ahead? And I'll catch up because I don't want to lose any of these lambs. Well, okay, says Esau, I'll see you there. And so Esau leaves their meeting at the ford of the river Jabbok, and he heads south back to where he was. And as soon as he's over the hill, Jacob gathers all of his people and goes north. This isn't a nice, neat little story with a very understandable ending. It's more like real life in that way. There is this reconciliation, yes, and yet Jacob just can't bring himself to be with his brother all the time. And he goes the other way and finds a settlement up towards Galilee. I'll give the last word this morning to Norma McLean. Each one of us here today will at one time in our lives look upon a loved one who is in need and ask the same question. We are willing to help, Lord, but what, if anything, is needed? For it is true we can seldom help those closest to us. Either we don't know what part of ourselves to give, or more often than not, the part we have to give is not wanted. And so it is those we live with and should know who elude us. But we can still love them. we can love them completely without complete understanding. Amen.